Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome to the Blazers Edge podcast. I am Dan Meringue, your co-host. Joined with me this week as, well, looks like going forward, Miss Tara Bowen-Biggs, team mom here. And, it's summertime. We're one of those things where we're sitting here kind of grinding and waiting for things to happen. And we've had plenty happen over the last week or so. And now we're kind of stuck in not only NBA basketball limbo, but Blazers basketball limbo as we're trying to figure out what this team is really going to formulate into. We've discussed some of the power forward issues that we have coming into the season, and as Dave Deckard's got an article up on the site right now. But this week, I think we're going to focus a little more on the wing and the guards with the recent Allen Crabbe trade. And right now, I'll go ahead and bring in Tara. Tara, how are you feeling right now? What's going on in your mind as we get within almost 2 months of preseason basketball?
Well, it's sure been a busy summer, Dan. I mean, the Blazers themselves haven't been doing a lot, as we all know, but tons of things have been happening around the NBA. And then just when I was about ready to turn off my notifications from Adrian Wojnarowski, along comes the news that the Trailblazers have traded Allen Crabbe. So kind of exciting that something has happened in Blazerland because it was awfully quiet. Honestly, it's been it's been keeping me up at night. Not because I'm worried about the team per se, but because I'm just trying to figure out what the Blazers are going to do with that extra roster spot. It's such an interesting puzzle.
Yeah, when this trade was first announced, and I know you probably talked to Eric Griffin about this, my initial thought was this has got to be either option one, part of helping facilitate a deal for Carmelo to Houston. This has got to be the first domino to fall.
So you seriously thought that was on the you seriously are giving that consideration, like that's on the table?
Yes, I still think, because I think Carmelo wants out of New York and he wants to go to Houston. The Melo's camp and everybody around that has basically said that Houston is it.
But not the part where Portland actually gets Carmelo.
No. I don't think Carmelo's coming to Portland. At no point in time did I ever think that was real. I think that, as a lot of people have discussed already, I think that was a lot of PR and marketing from Portland and Neil O'Shea trying to put some clout out there. And now that could still happen, but I think it puts Portland in a better position financially to make moves either now or going forward. They're within $2.5 million of the luxury tax right now with the way things sit. That means they can make moves that allow them to be more flexible without Allen Crabbe's contract there.
And it seems like it does give them more options going into next year. What with Nurkic coming up, with us needing to sign him, with Vonleh coming into the last year of his contract. And I guess we should say that as of this point, August 1st. The Blazers have not yet waived Andrew Nicholson, although it was reported immediately by Woj that the Blazers were planning on stretching him. So it hasn't become official.
Which, if it's coming from Woj, you assume that that's coming basically straight from the mouth of Neil O'Shea. That's typically how, if you're familiar with the communication chain, if it's said by Woj or Zach Lowe or Mark Stein, it's typically straight from Neil O'Shea. So,
and as far as I understand, they don't need to do it until the end of the month. So if the end of the month comes and goes, then we got a different story.
Exactly. There's 30 more days still, and you're talking about training camp coming up still a little ways away. So there's still time to make something happen where it's not going to impact how training camp looks. So internally, Portland's got some things to figure out if there is no other move right now. Because, yes, they have the extra roster spot, but in trading Allen Crabbe for a guy like Andrew Nicholson, you're not getting a like-for-like player. So let's say Nicholson isn't stretched. That's another player that you're putting in there that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Portland's immediate plans.
That doesn't seem very likely. And even if they do stretch him, like the Blazers they can go into the season with 14 people on the roster. You have to carry 13. But I don't, as far as I could tell, I read a couple of different articles, and I read some of the Larry Kuhn CBA FAQs. That was a terrible sentence. The Larry Kuhn Collective Bargaining Agreement frequently asked questions. And as far as I could tell, a team has to carry a minimum of 13. The whole league has to average at least 14 throughout the year. But, so it's conceivable that if they haven't made a move at the beginning of the year, that's possible. But let's back up a little bit and talk for a second about what Alan Crabbe did contribute to the team, so that we can kind of try to unpack and maybe read the tea leaves about what we think the Blazers might do. So let's talk about what Alan Crabbe did contribute to the team that is now, let's say, has gone with him. Obviously, 3-point shooting. We know that he had a great year of 3-point shooting last year. Some of the other things that he brought to the team, Dan, what do you think?
Oh, was there supposed to be something else besides 3-point shooting? Because there wasn't. Because there really wasn't with Alan Crabbe. He, for all the talk of the potential and the salary and the contract and all that stuff, yeah, it bothered me. It bothered me for what his contribution was at that point. But if you were one of those people that thought that Alan Crabbe had another gear, that he could develop a handful of dribble moves, basically have a Wesley Matthews type ascension, like every year come back with something new to your game. You could understand, even if you don't agree with it, you could understand why they did what they did. But that just hasn't been Alan Crabbe's MO at any point in time in Portland. He's always been a guy who was a 3-point shooter, and you're like, well, maybe he can figure it out defensively. Maybe he can add a couple dribble moves to a closeout on a defender. He's a good to great mid-range shooter. He's good coming off screens, but you never really saw that manifest itself. He'd catch coming off a screen wide open, and he'd hesitate to shoot. So the things that he was capable of doing weren't necessarily materializing because of his role or his confidence or something within the confines of the team system.
Well, I did think of a couple of other things that, not necessarily that he did, but that he was, that I think do contribute to how he filled out that roster spot. And one of the things is that he was taller than Dame and CJ. He was a taller guard. So we could switch out and put in at least a somewhat, even if not a whole bunch, he was at least taller, because we definitely don't have height with Dame and CJ. And, Crabbe had at least 3 inches. So that's a little something. And another thing that I think was kind of important about his game is that, as far as I could tell, he was fairly low usage. He didn't need the ball in his hands a lot. Contrast that with, say, Evan Turner, who's a guy who likes to handle the ball more. Crabbe could be out on the floor and be effective without having the ball in his hands. So those two things seemed pretty important to who he was as a player.
That's part of the problem with Crabbe, though. His usage rate fluctuated from 2015-16 to 16-17. He actually dropped quite a bit. 2015-16 was supposed to be, him showing improvement, the growth. Because in 14-15, he's an 11.5% usage rate. Basically, he's just out on the floor. 15-16, he's at 16.5. That's a huge increase. Well, then 16-17, he's at 14.9, where he's dropping down again when he's supposed to be featured more heavily. And I think that was always the biggest issue with him. Now, Crabbe presents length. There's no doubt about that. But it wasn't like it was incredibly useful length other than the occasional steal. Now, his steal percentage, I think, was the highest or second highest on the team. It goes back and forth between him and McCollum for the season. So
you don't think, when you have a lot of players who like to handle the ball a lot, that having a low usage player who could shoot reliably off the pass, you don't think that was a characteristic that the Blazers might look for to replace?
You need that guy. You need a 3-and-D guy. But if you're going to play 30 minutes a night, you have to take the opportunities that come your way. And I think that was one of the bigger detractions from Alan Crabbe. If you're going to be the 3-and-D guy, it's great that you're great from a percentage standpoint, but you got to give the attempts up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, let's put it this way.
Yeah, he only took 10, for 36 minutes he took 10 attempts.
No, Crabbe was at 4.8 per 36.
Oh, threes. Oh, okay. I thought we were talking all overall.
No. I'm talking threes here. If you're putting up 4.8, Al-Farouq Aminu is putting up 4.3. That's a problem.
Yeah, Crabbe should have been shooting many more threes than Aminu, especially with his much higher shooting percentage. Okay, so we can agree that besides threes, he had some length. We disagree on whether or not having him be low usage was useful to the team.
You can be low usage in the sense that you don't require the ball.
That's what I'm talking about.
There's plenty of guys in the league that don't require the ball that have a higher usage rate because when the ball, Wesley Matthews was a guy who had a high usage, but he didn't require the ball because his peak in Portland, his usage rate was around 20%, I believe. And that was because when the ball ended up in Wesley Matthews' hands in the corner, it was a shot. It wasn't a shot that was passed up. Think about the time that you had Wes and Nick at the same time. The starkest contrast between the two, it's the same kind of issue we had with Crabbe. When the shot was there for Wes and he was supposed to take the shot, never did you scream at the TV or in the arena or at the radio, shoot the ball, Wes.
Were you in my living room all season, Dan, listening to me yelling at Alan Crabbe to shoot the ball?
Everybody was. Because, I mean, the guy shot almost 45% from three. He's got a stroke and a half. There's no question about that. Like, anybody who wants to criticize Alan Crabbe on A through Z is fine. You cannot criticize the fact that the dude is a stone cold shooter from deep. He's a hell of a shooter in the mid range, and that's the issue. Is that you see that that's a definite weapon. He's one of the better pure shooters in the entire league, and yet he's not getting up shots. So that's when I talk about usage rate is kind of a weird stat in that yes, you need guys with different usage rates to function within the team. Mo Harkless is a perfect example. Mo has a low usage rate because he doesn't really...
Because he's like the third option or fourth option.
Exactly. And he doesn't need the ball. If Mo is shooting, it's a corner three or off a cut or in transition for a dunk.
And it's after the other two avenues have been cut off for the ball handler.
Correct. When Alan Crabbe is on the floor, Alan Crabbe is supposed to be catching and shooting. That's his role. So when he's not doing that, you're devaluing what is an incredibly valuable asset. And so I think that's where a lot of the frustration with his game lies, especially when you consider he's supposed to be a 3-and-D guy, and you're not getting the defensive chops out of it. Eric Griffith has talked about it quite a bit, actually, in a few different articles about how, by the end of the season, Crabbe's supposed to be the defender, but Crabbe's defense was so subpar at points that, they're instead of putting Crabbe on the top flight wing threat, they're just saying, screw it. Just put Dame or CJ on it. We're not getting anything more out of Crabbe anyways. Let Crabbe play a passing lane.
What if I amended what I said to say that Crabbe doesn't demand to have to handle and dribble the ball, and he doesn't hog the ball. Like Dame and CJ can hold on to the ball as long as he's ready to go when it goes into his hand. Whereas other players may dribble around and play around with the ball more. Alan Crabbe was more clear in his role. Like, my job is to shoot the ball or hesitate and pass it off. But
his options A and B.
What I was getting at was that he is not somebody who demands the dribbling the ball a lot and handling the ball a lot. He doesn't take the ball away from Dame and CJ.
No, not by any means.
Let's move on to what it is that you think the Trailblazers need the most now with this. I mean, obviously, we have two really good 3-point shooters, but that's not enough, right?
And that was the biggest issue I think with Portland last year, besides defense.
Uh-huh.
And this is something I've kind of beat the drum on this for a couple of years now, in that Portland used to have the market cornered on 3-point shooting. Think about this, 3-4 years ago. Portland had Dame, CJ, Crabbe, Wes Matthews, Nick Batum, Aaron Aflalo, Will Barton. I mean, they had shooters all up and down the roster, all over the place. Now, what do they have? You've got Evan Turner, who's a career. He may have gotten it above 30% for his career now, but he's a subpar 3-point shooter. Al-Farouq Aminu, that's a subpar 3-point shooter. Mo Harkless, subpar 3-point shooter. Nurkic is supposedly adding that range to his game.
We don't have anybody right now who's just money. Like, oh, he's got it. Yeah, it's likely to go in. Yeah, we don't have anything like that. Or do we?
CJ is the only guy on this team who is a stone cold shooter. Now, Dame is a clutch shooter. He's not a percentage shooter. The fact that he takes so many, but he makes so many, makes up for that. That bumps his effective field goal percentage up quite a bit. But you're still not at, I mean, if you toss out Connaughton, if you're only looking at rotation players, Crabbe had the best effective field goal percentage on the team by a large margin. So that's something that's difficult to replace as far as floor spacing and gravity is concerned. And that's a big time concern for Portland heading into this year.
I think you may have touched on this already, but is there anything that Crabbe was doing on defense that the Trailblazers would need to make sure that is covered now by somebody else?
Make sure? Not necessarily. The best points in basketball are in transition. And Crabbe did create, I think, the second most transition points on the team last year, either by finishing them or generating a steal.
Okay, yeah, he seemed, as I recall, pretty good at stealing. He was able to.
His steal percentage. I mean, that's almost where those ridiculously long arms come into play. He would get into passing lanes and create those opportunities. So that's something that's difficult defensively to replace when you're not bringing in somebody else who is able to create those kind of free points. Though I mean, when the average margin of victory in the NBA is plus or minus 5 points,
2 steals would be a big.
That's a big time number to try to replicate night in, night out. So that kind of makes me scratch my head, along with obviously the 3-point percentage and the floor spacing, because it's not just Crabbe's ability to knock down the three and the points that creates, but the floor spacing now. What's that look like for the second unit? I mean, you've got Evan Turner out there with CJ in the second unit. I mean, who else is going to be on the floor? I mean, and are you hoping that Swanigan comes out there? Because now if you run Evan Turner and if Ed Davis is out there with no Allen Crabbe and you've got Harkless and Aminu, where's the shooting coming from?
Do you think that the Blazers may look to, the Connaughton or Layman for an increased role in that way? Or do you think that they haven't really shown that yet? I mean, Connaughton, we're waiting to find out if he's even going to get picked up next year. Dame obviously, got lots of playing time right from the beginning. But AC and CJ, they both, really didn't see a lot of increase in their minutes until their third year. So Pat Connaughton is looking at his third year. Layman is looking at his second year. Do you think that that's something that Stotts might try out? I imagine he'll probably at least give it a try,
I mean, right now with the way the roster sits, somebody's going to have to. Somebody has to pick up Crabbe's minutes. It's not like Crabbe was only playing, a couple minutes a night. He was playing nearly 30 minutes a game. That's a big slice of the pie that needs to go to somebody. And I've heard a lot of people like, well, it means that Dame or CJ is going to be on the floor more. And I'm like, how? These guys are playing 36, 37, 38 minutes a night. You can't all of a sudden slot one of those guys in and go, hey, here's 6 more minutes for both of you. That's not going to fly.
Uh-huh. So, when you're in the workplace and you have your work team and somebody leaves, and then it's an opportunity for your team to look around and go, okay, do we want to just replace the person who left, or do we want to rewrite the job description? How would you do it if you were the Trailblazers? Would you look for somebody to replace Allen Crabbe who has the same skills or better? Or is this an opportunity you think to, like I said, rewrite the job description?
I'm kicking a lot of tires in the free agent market. I'm kicking a lot of tires on the free agent market right now.
So are you looking for just whoever's available and will come? I mean, what are you looking for? What's in the job description?
I think if you're going to bring in anybody, I think number one, you need to bring in a veteran because this team is still very young and lacks a veteran presence. And I think you need to have a two-way player. So that kind of hones down the list. I heard a lot of people be like, well, Portland needs some defense. Maybe you should look at a guy like Tony Allen. I'm like, 35-year-old grindfather is not the guy you want to give 20-plus minutes a night to. Not in today's NBA. Even prime Tony Allen would be kind of a problem for this team because of his offensive limitations. I think if you're looking at guys, obviously Gerald Henderson is somebody that's been mentioned a ton, and he's probably at the top of the list. He's familiar with the system. He's familiar with the players. Yeah, he's not an elite three-point shooter, but he is a legit two-way player. He gives you positional flexibility. He can come right in. You don't have to worry about how he's going to integrate. You know how Gerald Henderson is going to play within the system.
He could be the new Steve Blake.
I know what we got to get him at least 3 more times before he gets to Steve's level.
Every journey to becoming the team's Steve Blake starts with, one step, and that might be coming back this first time. He still would have to come back at least one more time.
Exactly.
But like you said, somebody who knows. He's also happens to be available. 76ers waived him, so he's available. One thing that he's pretty much a pure shooting guard, right? So he's along the lines of Crabbe. Like, he's not going to be somebody
he's bigger
who
than Crabbe.
is also going to need. Oh, that's true. But he's not going to need to be like controlling the ball a lot.
I think that both him and Evan Turner on the floor at the same time would be a little bit of an issue because they're both better with the ball in their hand. But it could create some opportunities for cuts for Portland because Henderson is a guy that obviously finishes above the rim very well.
Oh, remember how nice he used to jump so high?
Henderson's one of the smoothest jumpers. He's one of the smoothest jumpers and leapers in the league, and he's explosive as can be. And I think Portland could use some of that kind of athleticism. But there's other guys that are out there that aren't really being talked about right now, and those are the guys like Brandon Rush, a Randy Foye, Anthony Morrow. The guys that, I mean, you could bring back the corpse of James Jones if you got him for a vet minimum, just as a guy that's going to scare opponents for a couple of minutes a night to knock down some threes. There are players out there that could fit that role if you were talking about wanting to use guys like Connaughton or Jake Layman or something like that. You could get an older, savvy vet who's there for a purpose, such as floor spacing, but at the same time, you're not leaning as heavily on them as you would like a Gerald Henderson.
Okay. So if you brought in an older vet that was going to play fewer minutes, that might be the opportunity for those younger guys to show, to have time for development, but then you would have one extra player who could come in and also play some of those minutes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's really what you're looking at. I mean, otherwise you're looking at guys, that are still free agents that are out there. The guys that I listed, you're either limited to very young guys or very old guys, or some of the guys in between, like a Luke Babbitt.
Also another candidate for Steve,
exactly,
the new Steve Blake.
But yeah, I mean,
actually, do you want to know who I have in mind? You want to hear who I'm thinking about?
That?
Okay, so I was worried that this could be a terrible idea, but I also the more I think about it, I love it. Jason Terry.
Jet wouldn't be bad. In the
here's why I like him.
Bench coach,
38, I think, years old. But he still is shooting over 40%, over 40% from 3. He's not playing very much, and he's not a volume shooter. So that he wouldn't, come in and like take as many shots or minutes as Alan Crabbe did. But it goes back to, I think it would be great to have a veteran on the team who's been there. And I'll say this over and over again, I don't think he needs to take any, leadership, position from Damian. Damian's got the leadership, and CJ, they have that covered. But Jason Terry's experience, he won the championship with Dallas, so he's been all the way through a championship run. He knows all that. He knows everybody in the league, and he just simply loves playing ball.
Yeah,
I think he would be a fun addition to the team, and I think he could also help a lot by providing a lot of that wisdom.
it's actually, in theory, it's not a bad idea, simply because the minutes allocations where Crabbe was playing a lot of the two, if you're bringing in somebody like Terry or any other point guard, really, instead of having CJ play the point with the second unit, you essentially just move CJ to the two, and CJ could still run primary ball handling duties because Jason Terry's a great spot up 3-point shooter as well, and that would probably help alleviate. I'd lean more towards, if they're going to bring somebody in, it needs to be a bigger guard, because right now Portland is lacking that length and that size.
Is not his.
I mean, Jet's my size, and that doesn't fly in the NBA for long periods.
Yeah, that would definitely not cover the size requirement. Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, it's definitely something like that. I mean, really, any of the point guards are really, any of those guys are available to make that work. It would just present, I think, more hurdles for Portland, especially defensively, with this season. I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go about it. But again, we're talking about a Portland team right now that's still scrambling to find who their power forward is. And right now we don't know what the bench lineup is going to look like. So they've got a lot of questions that they need to answer still. And adding more talent, proven talent to the roster isn't necessarily a bad thing. So normally I'd be, adding a guy that old to the roster, I'm not a fan of, but with the way Portland's shaping up right now, if that was their best course of action, I wouldn't be against it.
Another thing to consider is that you wouldn't probably have to lock yourself into a multi-year contract with him. And so I think this move of trading Alan Crabbe is a lot about positioning for next year. Like, okay, none of these guys didn't develop the way that we thought they were going to. We're going to cut our losses and get ready for next year. And so I think if it was me, if I was, not that I have any business advising the Trailblazers, but I think one course of action that they might take would be to, have short contracts this year, so that next year they have as much flexibility and as much room to move as possible. Am I just like drinking the Kool-Aid on that one, or does that seem like a reasonable course of action?
No, it's absolutely reasonable, and it's prudent. Portland has needed to have contractual flexibility for a while now. Talking about restocking the cupboard, unless you're Cleveland and you're mortgaging your future every single year that you have LeBron James, trying to keep him happy, or you're Golden State and you're mortgaging your future by trying to keep that core together, you need to constantly maintain contractual flexibility. You need to have rookie deals. You need to have stars locked up, and you need to have guys on vet mins and TP, the taxpayer exemption or the MLE deals, short-term deals, value deals. You've got to have a mixture of all of them to be successful, because you need these pieces not only to be successful on the basketball court, but on the business side of things, you need them to be flexible to facilitate free agency, to facilitate trades. Part of the problem with Portland in making trades was that they don't really have, or they didn't over the last couple of years, they didn't really have chips that allowed them to make incremental moves one way or the other. It was either, hey, we've got a pile of rookie deals, or, hey, we've got really expensive deals. There was really no in between. I mean, you look over the last couple of years, the only guys that have been on rookie deals, CJ got his deal a year early. You're now, with the exception of Mason Plumlee and Nurkic, you had Vonleh. But everybody else was on their deals, and it made it very, very difficult to get beyond that, to bring other guys in or move other guys out.
I think it's really interesting the way free agency played out this year, and there are a lot of guys out there who have not signed contracts, who are going to be having to take 1-year contracts because, they may have, after last summer, expected that they were going to get multi-year contracts, and then suddenly,
the NBPA,
things have really dried up for that.
The NBPA made I think, a serious error in explaining salary cap smoothing to their union members, because guys last year, they got theirs. Guys this year, they aren't getting theirs. It's just not happening. People are the teams are much more prudent about who and when and where they're signing. That's what it comes down to. It's not like the money just dried up. People stopped overpaying for mid-tier assets.
Yeah, it certainly felt like last year there was a big spending spree, and this year people are being much more conservative. I don't. Do you ever listen to the JJ Redick podcast?
Oh yeah.
Did you listen to this one where he talked about his experience of free agency? I found it super enlightening to hear it from the player's point of view. He talked about how initially, like, he had all these thoughts about what he was going to ask for and what he wanted. He wanted, like, a multi-year contract was, like, super important to him. And he also, I think, wanted to go to Brooklyn. So, and he's like, we all say that we're not thinking about it during the season, but we're all thinking about it.
These guys talk about it in the locker room. They know what's going on with these contracts, what guys around the league are getting paid, and what the situations are with certain teams and with certain organizations and front offices and those inner workings and relationships with certain teams. While a player may be a perfect fit salary cap wise and year wise and age wise and basketball wise, there are things going on within an organization that people on the day-to-day just don't know about. And guys will go, you know what? I don't want to play there. I know what's going on inside that locker room and what's going on with that coach and with that GM. And I'm just going to stay away from that. And so that's why some of these things don't always come to fruition.
It was really interesting to hear him talk about the contract that he eventually took, of course, with Philadelphia for $23 million for 1 year. And, everybody's saying, obviously, that's a massive overpay, but that's what we needed to do because that's what worked out for our team because, like, we needed somebody this year, but we didn't know what the future was. Because he also talked to Brian Colangelo. So once JJ Redick, accepted the fact that he wasn't, and it was really hard for him to accept the fact that he wasn't going to get the multi-year contract that he wanted. So there's a lot of guys out there right now who are having to accept the fact that they're not going to get that multi-year contract that they wanted. But the other interesting part was how fast the actual negotiation, or not negotiation, but the actual thing went. It was basically he was called by his agent and was like, so this offer is on the table for you from Philadelphia. You have 15 minutes to decide. And he was like, I'm 10 minutes from my wife. Like, I have to go talk to my wife first. I need more time. And they were like, well, that's how much time you have to make this decision. So again, really interesting to see it from the perspective of the team because they had all these other things that were waiting. So they had to they had to hurry him along because they had all these other things waiting to fall into place or not fall into place. So I thought it was a really educational piece to kind of get a little bit more of a sense about what it might be like for some of these individuals, because we talk about them a lot like they're a piece of paper. But it was a really interesting human look at what free agency is like. And when you look at some of those guys who are like Mason Plumlee still isn't, our boy who was, on our team for a year and a half, he still doesn't have anything. It's kind of a scary world out there, I think. And guys who've made it this long or who've waited this long to get a contract, I guess maybe things are looking up for teams because if you want to work next year, you kind of got to take what you can get. Maybe.
Yeah, you're basically looking at 1, 2, maybe 3-year deals, some MLEs, and probably a lot of vet minimums if you want to, get any kind of deal. And I mean, if you look at the list of guys that are still out there, Monte Ellis, Gerald Henderson, Tony Allen, C.J. Watson, Leandro Barbosa, Brandon Rush, Anthony Morrow, K.J. McDaniels, Trey Burke, Randy Foye, James Young. I mean, those are just, those are the guards. I mean, you start looking at the forward position, and you've got a ton of guys out there. Somebody that Dave Deckard has loved for a couple years now, Nikola Mirotic, Tiago Splitter, Lavoy Allen, Chris Humphreys, Dante Cunningham, Shabazz Muhammad, who was supposed to be, one of the big tier free agents as far as RFAs go. Nerlens Noel.
Yeah, Nerlens Noel, that surprises me.
Dallas is putting the squeeze on him. I mean, he's not going to get crazy money. They're letting the market dictate what's going to happen. And I think that for an organization like Dallas, that's incredibly good for them. But Nerlens Noel's probably sitting there scratching his head like, wait, with the way everything went last year, the Players Association and the union, they basically told me I was going to get paid.
Yeah. If your time wasn't last year, you are kind of out of luck. Well, so let's work on wrapping this up. we've talked all about folks who are available for free agency who might be possible. Real quick, anybody who you think might via trade end up realistically coming to Portland?
If this Ryan Anderson to Portland to facilitate the Carmelo deal happening does go down, obviously that
I feel like we're right back where we started if that happens. I guess it depends on what goes out with him.
And that's the thing is that
for him, I guess.
You have to assume it has to be at least Maurice Harkless and probably somebody like Myers Leonard or Ed Davis to make that kind of deal happen, to get underneath where they need to be contractually. But I'm wondering if part of that deal, Portland ends up using some or all of the trade exemption they created with the Allen Crabbe deal. And if that brings in a Trevor Ariza, which I don't think is really going to happen, or an Eric Gordon, which I really don't think is going to happen, but that would solve a lot of the floor spacing, offensive continuity issues that Portland is facing, even with Allen Crabbe.
It would solve a lot of the basketball problems.
Exactly.
Is that what you're getting at? But it wouldn't necessarily offer them more flexibility in the future as far as roster flexibility.
Exactly. So there's definitely things that would inhibit that. Other deals that are out there, this time of year, it's hard to kind of make a trade because teams kind of have their roster set unless they're making a big time move. And they want to lock in and see what their team's going to look like. So Portland may be basically stuck here unless, they help facilitate a big deal until the trade deadline. And so Portland making this move, they may have made it full well knowing this is the roster they're going to have going into the season. And that's got to make
like
Portland
we talked about at the beginning, they don't have to have 15 players on their roster. That's what I was getting at the beginning. There's nothing that says they have to have 15.
Yeah, they don't have to make any more moves. And, as a fan, that kind of bothers me because you want this team to make another move to kind of fill out the way the roster is structured right now, because there's huge holes in it right now.
But do you want them to make a move just for the sake of making a move? Or do you want them to wait and see? Because, Pollyanna talking here, maybe Jake Layman turns out to be that dead-eye shooter that we were looking for, and he, fills up a lot of what we lost when Crabbe left. You never know. Or do you want people to just make a move for the sake of making a move?
I don't think it's for the sake of making a move. I think if they make a move, it's going to be for a known quantity. So a Gerald Henderson type. And that doesn't solve the problem. It just kind of plugs the hole and makes it a bit more palatable going forward. It makes a lot more sense basketball-wise and even contractually going forward, because you're not going to commit a ton of money and it's not going to be for a real long term. But we're talking about, the Allen Crabbe-sized hole. There was already roster problems at the wing because Evan Turner doesn't really fit with this team. Allen Crabbe wasn't really playing up to what his potential or what people expected of him. So those are two already issues that you had with the team. You're losing an asset in 3-point shooting that you don't really have readily available. That's a problem. So, they created, I think, more problems, but at the same time, they also don't have any ready-made solutions, and they're finding themselves in a Western Conference that basically every team that's vying for a playoff spot got better. I mean, that's a really, really tough pill to swallow, I think, if you're a Blazers fan looking at it, at least from my perspective. So I hope they make a move. I sincerely do hope they make at least one more move to fill out so you can at least start to make sense of the depth chart going into the season. Now, I don't know if that's going to be a problem for them going forward, internally, but from the outside looking in, it's not a good look. I'll just leave it at that.
I don't know.
You like to be the optimist. I know. It's totally fair.
So Dan, you're the dark musings to my light musings. we have different Muse cages, and if you don't know what a Muse cage is, you need to look up Muse cage and type in Kobe and Muse cage, and you will be entertained for days. But I do think it's hard right now because we can be like, oh, everybody else has gotten so much better, and like that is true. So what do we do about it? We need to have at least something that's entertaining for us to watch. I mean, what are we going to do? Just like walk away because we're not we're not going to win the championship? I mean, it looks pretty unlikely that that's not going to happen this year. So what do we look to to make this year worth it? I mean, and I think the young players is one of the things that we need to turn to. I mean, we still have, I think it's really important that we give Nurkic a whole year. And I think that's why we have a lot of this, why we need to not just go out and get somebody for long term, why we just need to get somebody short term, because Nurkic could work out beautifully, or he could have, a lot of the same issues that he did while he was in Denver. And so I think this is going to be a lot of wait and see this year. And I think we're going to also have to watch, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of young player development. I mean, it was like a couple of years ago, Stotts threw Vonleh into the starting lineup. I kind of feel like I wonder if he's going to just throw somebody into the starting lineup. Because remember what he said? I thought he needed some minutes. This might be the year that he decides that Jake Layman needs some minutes. And we might see Jake Layman in like the starting position for some reason, just because what else can we do? Like, with Golden State and, other teams just getting better.
I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head right here. If you're not competing for championship, I think, in my personal opinion, if you're not competing for one, you need to be building towards one. And I think the Allen Crabbe deal was something. It was the deal itself, I think, was a bad play in the first place. And I've said that probably about 1 billion times now. Getting out from under that is nice, but basically what you got out of it is a net negative, I believe. And taking a step backwards right now when your plan wasn't that fantastic to begin with, in my view, that doesn't bode well for Portland going forward.
So do you think losing Crabbe was a step backwards?
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to where Portland is. I always thought that the second he signed that deal that they needed to get away from it as soon as possible. But
so were you in the chorus of people who thought that we needed to that thought that the Blazers ought to have more roster flexibility?
Yes.
I mean, now that after the trade, I mean, obviously we can't go back in time, but now at least we have more flexibility, don't we?
A little bit more, but we're not talking the fact that they weren't able to get under.
I think it's overblown how much.
Exactly.
Okay.
Everybody wants to tout the TPE as like it's worth its weight in gold. TPEs go unused regularly, very regularly. It's nice to have to help facilitate something, but beyond that, you're just kind of it's meh. So it's really difficult to sit there and look at it like it was this really successful move. Granted, they got out from under it. In my opinion, that was a good move from a financial and long-term view standpoint. But as far as team building, you lost an asset who you overpaid and didn't get anything in return. If we're talking about hindsight, it seems like it would have been a whole heck of a lot better to sign somebody like Gerald Henderson to that spot for half the cost for the same amount of years and be in a better position.
But we can't go backwards. So in 1 minute, tell me what move you would recommend if you were the person who was advising the Trailblazers what to do next. What would your recommendation be? If
they can get Gerald Henderson for the mini MLE for 2 years, do it.
Does he qualify for a veterans minimum yet?
Oh yeah. He's
29, right?
He should. I think. Well, I'm almost certain he does. I believe he has 10 years service.
And if he does, the thing about the veterans minimum is you get reimbursed for it, right?
Yeah. So I mean, either way, the mini MLE and the vet min are probably going to be pretty close to where we're pretty close to each other. So, but I mean that seems like to be the best course of action. It's not great, but if you're talking about moves that you can make that aren't going to limit flexibility going forward, that you don't have to worry about how to integrate with the system. I mean, how often can you say that the guy you're going to bring in is already familiar with the players, the coach, the system, the organization, the city, where you don't have to worry about how he's going to come into and fit in? I mean, that's a rare situation that you can talk about. So that to me gives him a leg up on basically everybody else. Even if there's somebody that maybe talent wise or skill set wise was maybe a little bit better, I think because of all the other intangibles, Henderson is the best idea for the short term.
All right. Well, there you go for Blazers executives who are listening to the Blazers Edge podcast. Dan's recommendation is Gerald Henderson. Mine is, I do actually really like Gerald Henderson, but I'm also going to put in a plug for Jason Terry because I really think it would be fun to have a crusty old vet who can teach them all the dirty tricks that have been tried on them before, and have somebody with a championship to their name would be exciting. Anything else you want to say, Dan, before we wrap it up?
No, we got 63 more days until preseason, so I think we'll have plenty more time to talk about other things as things progress.
I'm so excited that the season everything is moving up a little bit earlier. That's, just a couple more weeks and we could just close the gap even between the off season and the preseason.
This is basketball purgatory. I mean, that this time of year is basketball purgatory. You're just sitting here like, please God, when you're begging for training camp, that's when you're just kind of jonesing. So.
Well, we still have the Melo shoe to drop, and we still have the Kyrie question out there. And are there any other big NBA storylines that we're really waiting on? Those are probably the two biggest ones that could really shake things up.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing there is can we just keep Kyrie in the Eastern Conference? We don't need another All-Star point guard in the West. That's basically my whole thing on that right now.
We ran out of time before we could talk about the Bill Simmons suggested trade scenario.
Let's just not acknowledge that. I put it out on Twitter, and I felt dirty even discussing it.
Folks, if you haven't seen it, you should Google that too, along with the Muse Cage.
That's your homework.
Bill Simmons Kyrie trade. Well, Dan, it was great to talk to you tonight. Lots of food for thought to trying to figure out what's going to happen now that Alan Crabbe is gone, and how the Blazers are going to make up that roster spot. And if they do, you can. I guess we'll just remind the listeners that they can subscribe to Blazers Edge on Stitcher and iTunes and pretty much whatever kind of podcast catcher you use. I am on Twitter at TCBBiggs. Please send me any questions or comments you want. Dan, how do people find you?
Yep, you guys, as always, you can find me on Twitter at DMarang. It's at DMARANG. Yes, it's meringue like the pie for those that have ever questioned or wondered. Hit me up anytime on Twitter. My DMs are open. You can tweet at me. Ask anything as far as really anything. I love just kind of shooting it on Twitter. So, but if you've got Blazers questions, it doesn't matter the time of day. I'll always get back to you.
Dan, thanks a lot for joining me. On behalf of Dan Marang, thanks for joining us on the Blazers Edge podcast.